Hi everybody, welcome to Dram Daddy Whiskey. I'm Dan, and tonight I'm going to walk through a limited edition version of a whiskey that you've probably seen on store shelves at just about every liquor store around you. It's pretty common, but this specific version is limited. We are talking about the Templeton Rye, finished in Oloroso sherry casks. Templeton Rye is a brand that I see pretty often in most liquor stores that I've been to, and the version that I see most often, the version you'll probably see most often, is their 6-year-old rye. That's kind of their basic version. It's their flagship rye. Decent age statement for a rye, nothing too spectacular or crazy. But we're talking today about the Oloroso sherry finished Templeton Rye, 6-year rye that they then finished for 9 months in Oloroso sherry casks. Templeton Rye has been around since 2006, I believe, and they're based in Templeton, Iowa. This was rye that was developed in Prohibition era. Supposedly it was Al Capone's favorite drink, was this Templeton Rye. And they came around again in 06 trying to kind of revive that mentality, but they got in a little bit of hot water because they weren't being really transparent about what the whiskey was. They weren't even distilling it. They were saying it was this special mash bill, but really they were just getting all of their rye from MGP in Indiana. It was their 95% rye, 5% malted barley mash bill. So they got in some hot water. There was a class action. They had to limit some of the things that they would advertise on their bottle and make it really clear that it was from Indiana. And they have started distilling their own whiskey just this year in 2022. But this stuff here we know is distilled in Indiana. So this is MGP juice, the 95.5 rye, then finished for 9 months in the Oloroso sherry cask. So what is Oloroso sherry? Sherry is a type of fortified wine that's made in a specific region in Spain. Oloroso sherry is made from the Palomino grape. It's a white grape, but it's allowed to get a little older, a little more oxidized, has more time in the barrel, and so it gets a little bit darker, heavier, richer than some other sherries that are even made with that Palomino grape. Other types of sherries you might have heard of if you are used to cash finished whiskeys would be like Moscatel, and Pedro Jimenez is a really, really big one in Scotch. I have had some finished ryes before. I think the rye spice with some of the sweetness imparted by some of these different finishes is pretty cool, has a really cool effect, and lets everything shine in a way that I don't really get with bourbon, and is different than some of the finishes or the effect that the finishes have on some single malt scotches that I've really enjoyed. So I'm looking forward to try some more finished ryes, and let's look at the stats on this one. Templeton Rye finished in Oloroso sherry barrels. It is 46% alcohol by volume, so we're looking at 92 proof. Produced and bottled by Templeton Rye Spirits in Templeton, Iowa, distilled in Indiana with US and imported grains. So there's a good chance we have some Canadian rye in here as well, which is a bit of a surprise to me. Maybe they just put that on there as a disclaimer just in case. Enough talking about it. Let's dive into the Oloroso cask finished Templeton Rye. On the nose, sweet. You can tell it's a rye. You definitely can pick up a wine finish, but there's nothing seemingly dry about it. Everything about this is sweet. The combination of the 95.5 rye from MGP, which usually has a really, I think fresh is the best way I can put it. Sometimes it's like sort of minty, sometimes sort of piney, but always has this sort of green note about it, and just tastes very fresh. It's like it wakes you up. Not quite menthol, not that strong, but definitely this just green freshness about it. Sometimes almost like toothpaste, but this isn't that strong. And that fresh note from the 95.5 rye combined with this wine finish, it's just this really rounded sweetness on the nose. Let's see if the palate matches. Palate sort of matches. On the front, this is almost all just that 95.5 rye, maybe a bit toned down because of the wine, the sherry finish. That freshness isn't quite as potent. I'm not getting any minty or pine notes, just sort of that overarching freshness, like you took a breath of cold air in the middle of a forest or something corny like that. That's as close as I can come up with. On the back palate and the finish, for me is more where some of the rye spice kicks in. It gets a little prickly, a little peppery, not really a whole lot of heat. You know, this isn't the highest proof. And you get a bit of the sherry influence on that as well. It's this richness that I'm not used to getting on the 95.5 ryes. It brings like a red fruit component to it. It's almost like, not like a plum juice, but if there was like a plum juice cocktail, like in the way that there's cranberry cocktails, or maybe a bit of like a pomegranate, or something like that that's maybe a bit watered down, you know, not super potent. I'm getting a bit of that on the back palate and the finish, along with the rye spice. It's kind of a nice complement to that sort of fresh, classic 95.5 rye note that I'm getting on the front palate to then transition into like the rye spice and the sherry. It's kind of nice having those three distinct components and having that sort of development on the palate. I do really enjoy that. And with another sip, the rye is getting a lot more prominent in the palate, and I maybe am picking up a little bit of that pine note, but I still do have, it's almost like the sherry rounds it out on the back, where I am still getting some of that light, you know, pomegranate, plummy sort of sweetness that keeps the rye from getting too out of control or from stealing the show completely. I like this rye quite a bit. I think this is a really good, really versatile rye, I guess, really versatile whiskey in that there is a lot of complexity there, or at least some complexity. So if you want to sit down and just enjoy a whiskey, chew on it, think about it, I think this isn't a bad choice for that at all, because you can work through that development on the palate. But with that being said, the things that stand out to me are pretty straightforward and do stand out a lot, that I think you don't have to be really invested in appreciating the whiskey and paying a whole lot of attention to it to enjoy it. I think this would, you know, be a perfectly fine whiskey to be able to drink while you're watching a show or unwinding, you know, having a chat with someone as well, because you are still going to pick up on those notes whether you're paying close attention to that or not, which I think is pretty cool. So the whiskey in the bottle, what am I going to give this? I do wish this wasn't proofed down so much. It could be more viscous. It's not, I would definitely wouldn't call it an oily mouthfeel. I'd say this is on the lighter side of the viscosity. I think I'd give this a 7.6. This is a good whiskey, a pretty good whiskey. I wouldn't call it great. I'd say it's good to really good. 7.6 sounds about right. If we take, you know, price, the presentation, total drinking experience, everything into account to try to give this overall whiskey a grade, not just the liquid in the bottle, I'd say a grade on this is probably an even B. It's around 60 bucks before tax. Rye is more expensive than bourbon most of the time, just because rye is a more expensive grain. If you're going to finish this in sherry casks, you know, any finishing is going to be expensive. Sherry in particular, you know, you're competing with a lot of folks across the world to get those really good sherry barrels. So the fact that I do think there was a pretty good sherry finish component on this, it justifies that price to some extent. But it's also hard to pay, in my opinion, 60 bucks before tax on a bottle that you think is proofed down a little bit too much, for me at least, because I think that is taking away from the experience that you could have had. A B is the grade that this one's gonna get from me. I wouldn't hesitate to pick it up, especially if you like the 95.5 MGP ryes. If you've had it already, I'm really curious to see what you think. If you pick up on different notes, if you liked it, if you think it's a good value or not, let me know in the comments, because I've not really heard a whole lot about this bottle, so I wanna know what other folks think. Until next time, hope you enjoyed the video. Like, comment, subscribe if you did. It certainly helps me out a lot. Have a good one. Cheers.